What's going on, guys? My name is Brandon. I am a journeyman electrician with 6 years of experience. Welcome to the Call Me Cowboy YouTube channel. So I have seen a lot of other channels that advertise the most expensive tools or really high quality tools, and it's not that they're bad tools. It's just if you are an apprentice trying to get your foot in the door, sometimes it can make it seem like it's going to cost a fortune to get into the trade. So my advice has always been get something that's either good quality but maybe not going to break the bank, maybe not the most expensive option but somewhere in the middle, or if you need to get your foot in the door, get the cheapest tool that you can find that'll do the job for a little bit until you get your paycheck. Once you start getting those paychecks roll in, then you can slowly build your tools to your needs. I think what a lot of people forget whenever they're trying to do YouTube is that, when they get sent sponsorships, when they get sent, oh, hey, Klein sent me this, it's nice for them and good for them, but they kind of, I think, forget that when you're an apprentice and you're starting out, money can be very tight. So I have compiled a list of tools that I think that you absolutely should have on your first day walking in the door, as well as, maybe some that you get your first week, maybe after your first paycheck. But the thing is a lot of the times your employer will buy you your tools. If you are doing an apprenticeship through IBEW, then they provide most of your tools, if not all your tools. But even if you're working for a private contractor, that's what I'm doing. And there have been plenty of tools that my boss has bought for me. There have been a couple tools that journeymen have given me. And, since I've been a journeyman, some of my older tools I have given away because there's apprentices that are getting into the trade and they need them. And I've upgraded my tools, so why not pass on my old tools to the next up-and-comers? So without further ado, here's my list of things that you absolutely do need when you are starting. Let's get into it. So first and foremost is a dedicated set of screwdrivers. Every screwdriver is individual. And you can see here I've picked out every screwdriver that you will need starting out. Maybe not every one, but most of them. There could be specialty screwdrivers here and there. Like, for instance, at one point I needed a T25 Torx screwdriver. And I needed dedicated because it had to be a real thin tip, so I couldn't just stick a T25 bit inside of a bit holder or anything like that. But when you are walking in your first day, these are the screwdrivers you'll need. So you'll see there is a mix here, and that's just because I have lost them over the years. Again, I've been doing it 6 years. And some of it, I bought different sets that had different screwdrivers in them, and these are just the ones that have stayed, the ones that I haven't lost. So I have a few different brands. Of course, I have the Weehaw insulated, and that's the only reason I really have these two up here is because I have lost my metal number 1 Phillips and number 1 square. So I mainly use these Wera insulated drivers now. However, I do recommend that you get a set that are not insulated, because a lot of the times you're going to be reaching into places where this insulation here will get in the way. I did for a while have a set of Klein insulated ones that are slimline. So this little piece of insulation that comes up here just goes straight into the head of the driver. And those were a lot nicer. I could actually get those into terminal blocks and stuff that I needed to. But I have, this is a Craftsman Evolve. I almost said Ego, probably because it's green. But this was my first set of screwdrivers, and when I started as an apprentice, I had this, which is a Phillips 2, and I also had a 1/4-inch slotted screwdriver, which for some reason I always lose my 1/4-inch slotted screwdrivers. But that was my first set. Then I got a full set of Klein screwdrivers, which is what I actually recommend for any of you starting. I would also recommend these Craftsman Evolve if they still make them. I will look and see, and if they don't, I'll leave a link for some cheaper screwdrivers, and I'll also leave a link for these Klein screwdrivers. But yeah, that was my first set. Then I moved on to these, and I still have the number 2 Phillips for it, but I really wanted to show this Craftsman. I really love this Craftsman. I love the ergonomics of the handle. The tip is not bad. It's not the best, but it's not bad. Whoa, sorry, my camera's messed up. But yeah, these Klein screwdrivers, they came in a pack. It had a number 2 Phillips, a number 1 Phillips, a 3/16 flathead, and a number 2 square, I think. I don't think it had a number 1 square, and I don't think it had a 1/4-inch flat. But I also ended up buying, and I bought a 1/4-inch flat for the Klein separate, but I have since lost that screwdriver. Again, always lose the 1/4-inch flatheads. That's the one I always lose. So to mimic a 1/4-inch flathead, I have this made in the USA Milwaukee. And these are not bad screwdrivers either. The handle's pretty ergonomic. They're not too expensive. The tips, when they're new, are pretty good. But I always use my 1/4-inch flatheads as a beater. And I do recommend, if you get the 1/4-inch Milwaukee, do not use it as a beater, because that tip wore down quick. The first time I beat on it, you can kind of see it's rounded over. It's just no longer a very good tip. So what I use now as my everyday screwdrivers are this Weir set. And again, it's got a 3/16 flat, number 2 Phillips, number 2 square. Sorry, I was looking through the camera. That's not a number 2 square. This is the 1/4-inch flathead, number 2 square, number 1 Phillips, and number 1 square. As far as an insulated set, I cannot recommend these enough. I love the handles on them. Some of them do get a little bit small, but when you're doing work with these, you're usually not doing things that are as large anyway. So having, the small handle that you can just easily index gets pretty nice. And then the handles, like for the number 2 Phillips and the number 2 square, those are rather large. The only thing I wish is that the 1/4-inch flathead, it has a handle somewhere in between the number 2 Phillips and square and the number 1 Phillips and square. They're just kind of in between. This handle specifically could be bigger. But you can see I use the hell out of this screwdriver. So on from dedicated screwdrivers. Multi-bit screwdrivers. So what I carry every day now is the Klein ball grip. This one's ratcheting. The ratchet on it is incredibly smooth. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's beautiful. And I really like it because I can stick this in my hand like this. Hold on, I'm not left-handed and I'm trying to do that left-handed. But I can stick it in my hand like this and just spin this part here. And then if I spin this black thing back the other way, I can spin it to the left. And then as soon as it gets tight or whatever, I can just take the whole thing, I can grab on this ball and I can get a lot of torque out of that ball. So I absolutely love this. And this shaft is, I'm recording one-handed now, I don't have a tripod. But that shaft has a 1/4-inch flathead, which I use as a pretty much dedicated 1/4-inch flathead and dedicated Phillips, which is Phillips 2. I love this screwdriver, and I can't recommend it enough. But you can beat on this screwdriver. In fact, I put it in this 1/4-inch flathead, and I beat on the end of that. You can tell, You know, that thing is scratched up from beating on it with a set of Kleins. So, you know, incredibly durable, especially for a ratcheting screwdriver. But my first multi-bit screwdriver was something like this. This is a heavy duty 11-in-1. My first was not heavy duty. So you have on one end, you have number 2 square, or number 2 Phillips. You have a number 1 square, a number 2 square, 3/16 flathead, a number 1 Phillips, and a 1/4-inch flat. And you get all of that in one screwdriver. The only thing is that everything is proprietary, so that means that you can't just use these bits anywhere. So, and it's also got, if you stick this in here, so that'll go into this shaft. You know, shaft goes into the screwdriver. You then got a 1/4-inch nut driver. You take that one out, that gives you a 3/8 nut driver. And then if you flip this over and you take this bit out, that gives you a 5/16 nut driver. Which all of those are very handy, and that's why I carried it for so long, even when I had these other multi-bits. So we'll move on from that here in just a second. This one here, I gotta say, kind of a swing and a miss as far as Klein Tools is concerned. So first of all, the bits are absolutely amazing. This is the Impact 13-in-1. So there's 6 double-sided bits, as long as with a 1/4-inch nut driver, and I say that in quotes, and I'll get into that here in just a second. This is actually my second one. So the bits in here are incredible. You know, they perfectly machined for electrical work. You know, the number 1 square fits perfectly in receptacles. Number 2 square just fits perfectly in panel screws. So that part's not bad. It ratchets. So same thing as the ball grip. You got this black piece here. You can turn it to the right. And if you turn it to the right, it actually goes left. And then if you turn it to the left, it actually goes right. And I do not like that part of it. It does have some knurling up here, so I mean, you can spin this with your fingers to get the screw started. And the ratcheting mechanism's not bad in it. You turn it to the center and it locks. I usually keep this one locked. I don't really care for the ratcheting on something with a large handle like this. I think the ball grip is the only thing that I like that. But my problem with this screwdriver, this is my second one. So the first one had 2 problems. This little rubber part on this handle slips over the plastic part. So you end up where, you know, when you're trying to get torque down, this rubber part just slips over and you can't really get that much torque. Another thing is, see if I can get it in the light a little bit better. So if you can see in there, there's 2 little tabs, and those are retention springs that hold those bits into place. There's no magnet. And if you use this thing as a 1/4-inch nut driver, you got to beware, because it can, and has on me, worn down those springs to where it won't hold the bit. So that's the main reason I had to get a second one. I actually gave the first one away to somebody who needed a screwdriver, and I told him, you know, hey, this one, it doesn't hold the bits really well, but it does work, and, you know, the bits are still good in it. So I gave it to them. So, you know, I've got mixed feelings about this. I feel like it could go somewhere, you know, it could be a good idea, but I think they just dropped the ball with this one, with the quality. The termination screwdrivers. So you can get, you know, a set of termination screwdrivers, but they've just got the spin cap on the back here. This one is a 4-in-1, and honestly, this is exactly what I would recommend from, you know, Klein, Milwaukee, whatever. But it's just got number 0 Phillips and a double-aught Phillips, as well as a 3/32 flathead, which this one is actually bent. You know, you gotta be careful, don't put too much torque on these. Yeah, and then this side's got the 1/8 inch and a Phillips 0. That side's got the 3/32 and the Phillips 00. So yeah, get yourself a termination screwdriver. It doesn't have to be expensive. Just get you one of these little 4-in-1 or 5-in-1, I guess, if you include the nut driver, which I have no idea what size nut driver it'd be. I don't even know if it says. Yeah, I don't see where it says anywhere, but I do recommend you get a termination screwdriver, or you know, you get a cheap set from Harbor Freight. All right, so the next screwdriver on my list is going to be a beater screwdriver, and I don't necessarily recommend Klein Tools for a beater screwdriver, but that is what I have. If you do get Klein Tools, I recommend the 1/4 inch. The shorter one, I think it's, I don't know, 6 inch, 7 inch, something like that. If you get the really long one, I have had problems with them. My boss has had one and I've had one. Basically the shaft will break off of the handle, like the acrylic part of the handle will break about right here, and the whole rubber along with the metal cap just comes and slides off of it. So you're just left with a metal shaft and an acrylic handle that's broken on the back. And we've broken 3 of them together now. I've broken 1 and he's broken 2 of them. So I've had this one for going on 2 years now, and it hasn't broken yet. But it is the same, I mean, it's basically the same screwdriver, so I'm just kind of counting down the days until it breaks. I do know that they have the flared screwdrivers now from Klein, or the flared beater screwdrivers. Weir has the beater screwdriver, Milwaukee has them. You can get Husky beater screwdrivers, but at the end of the day, it's a beater. I do not recommend that you get something high dollar. And if you just get a regular 1/4 inch Klein without the metal cap, you can beat on those too. I mean, I have wailed on those screwdrivers and had nothing bad happen. But I do recommend that you get something that you don't mind beating on, even if it's just a cheap screwdriver. All right, so for this next section, I'm going to get into some pocket carry tools. So these are tools that, you know, if you carry bags all day, you can have them on your bags, but if you are working out of a bag, I still recommend that you have every one of these tools in your pockets at all times, because chances are you will need them. First one, you're going to want a non-contact voltage tester. This one is Klein, and if you can tell, it is worn out. I've had this specific one for probably 3 years now. And this one, I carry this specific one because it's got a laser pointer. So whenever I'm talking to customers or trying to direct apprentices, I can use the laser pointer on it and show them what I'm looking at from the ground without getting up on a ladder. There's plenty of these. Take your pick, just get a reliable one. Fluke, Klein, Fleer, Milwaukee I wouldn't get. I don't trust the Milwaukee. I've actually used the Milwaukee and it lied to me, and I've gotten bit because of it, which you're not supposed to rely on those by themselves. But, you know, at some point you end up trusting your tools too much. You know, just always use a meter to double check. I know people say that, and a lot of people ignore that advice, and I was one of them. I ignored that advice and it bit me because of it. Luckily it was just 120, but you know, it could have been worse. So the other thing is writing utensils. Always have a pen, pencil, and a marker. That is non-negotiable. You do need those 3 items. Another one you may or may not need, but gosh, they're handy, and for 99 cents, they're worth it. Get yourself a lighter. You know, you wouldn't know the amount of times that I've been on a job and somebody said, "Hey, anybody got a lighter?" And it's usually the one guy that smokes that has it, but hey, you know, when you need a lighter, you need a lighter. So, you know, whether it's heat shrink or doing sketchy things with PVC glue, trying to make a little fire so that way you can bend the PVC, you just never know when somebody's going to need a lighter. Maybe somebody's trying to cook on a grill for lunch and need a lighter to start the grill. That's just something that everybody should have on them at all times. Another one is a good flashlight. This one is an Olight baton, and you know, I love this light. You can tell it gets pretty bright. It's got multiple different settings. It's got a turbo mode. This thing is really, really nice, but it is $100. You know, it's not quite 100, but it's pushing 100. So if you can swing it, I would recommend. If not, get yourself one of those little $20 AAA powered stream lights or rechargeable stream lights or O-lights. You know, they're little bitty, and I'll leave a link to the Streamlight version. But get yourself a flashlight. And the next thing, pocket knives. So this was the pocket knife that I've had since I was, you know, maybe 12, 13. And, you know, these things are great. This is a Kershaw. They're not too expensive. You know, they're great little pocket knives. It stays sharp. It holds its edge. However, whenever you're constantly stripping wires, any dedicated pocket knife like this, you're going to dull the blade pretty quickly, and you're either going to be constantly sharpening, or you're going to have a dull blade. So if you are an electrician, I recommend a box cutter. And I mean, you can get just a regular box cutter, but I do recommend these Milwaukee flip blades or Milwaukee fastbacks. I've had some of the Kleins and they just kind of fall apart prematurely. I like this one because it's got a Phillips and flathead built into it. So if I am just going through a job and walking through it, and I have this in my pocket, if I need to open up a panel real quick, or you know, open up a receptacle and just take a look in it real quick, I can use this instead of going back out to the truck and grabbing my tool bags. So that is all the pocket carry stuff. And the next thing that I would recommend are your pliers. So every electrician has to have a set of lineman's pliers. And the only linemen's that I can truly recommend are Kleins, because that is the only thing that I have used that's been reliable. If you do get Kleins, I do recommend you get the D2000, and it'll say 9NE. That just means that it's lineman pliers. But D2000 or J2000, and D2000 means that it's got these dipped handles, which I do prefer dipped handles on my pliers. At least my bigger ones. You know, some of my smaller strippers and stuff, I prefer journeyman's, but the 2000s basically mean that it's got a hardened edge cutter up here. These specific pliers are actually pretty new for me. I haven't had them that long. What I have had is these. And I know these look the same. You know, these have a darker handle than the other ones. But basically these are a D, it's hard to make out, and you won't be able to make it out on camera, but these are D213s, and they also make the J213s, and again it says 9NE, which just means it's a set of lineman pliers. These I've had for 3 years, and I had another set of these before they started engraving the American flag up here. But I had another set of these, and the cutters wore out on them. And what I didn't understand as an apprentice is these have the cutter on them is not hardened to the extent that this is. So what ends up happening is whenever you cut like a triplex with a steel cable in it, these cutters will get little divots in them. And that's what happened to my old ones. So I got an identical set to replace them, but that's just something you got to look out for. And they do make a set that has fish tape puller and set with crimpers and all that. So I mean, you just got to pick and choose. I opted without, because you can stick a fish tape right here, and you can sit there and pull on it. You know, one hand here and the other hand on the handles. And if you have that fish tape through here, you can grab onto your fish tape like this and pull, and it works out great. So I opted to go without the fish tape puller crimpers, and I've got a dedicated set of crimpers. If you want, you can get the set with crimpers. But yeah, these are my recommendation. These, I don't not recommend them, but I also don't recommend them. So next on the list is a set of diagonal cutters. Again, I recommend Klein. These are going to say the same thing as the linemen's. They're hard to see on camera right there. So these will say D2000 and these say 48. Made in the USA. And there's the 48 is the ones that have the angled head, which I do recommend because you can grab staples or nails. You can grab them like that, and then you got a pivot point basically to pull up on those. But just watch out. Make sure that you get something that says D or J 2000. And again, same thing as the lineman's. It just means that it's got a hardened cutter up here, so it's not going to sit there and dent the cutter whenever you're trying to cut through steel. You know, you can cut nails, bolts, whatever, small bolts with these and not hurt the teeth. So the next one can be kind of a sore subject, and I think this is the main area where you see people that recommend constantly to get these. This is the Knipex wire stripper, forged wire stripper. You know, it's a great set of pliers. I have no complaints with it, but when you are an apprentice and you are starting out, these things are $60, $70. And it's not bad if that's all you're buying, but when you're buying all of these tools, if you are constantly buying the expensive versions, that adds up. You know, the cutters in these are amazing. They cut wire like butter. And I've seen some people say, don't cut MC. The thing is where I'm from, we use aluminum MC, so these do cut through MC just fine. I know some people have to use steel MC, and in that case, do not use these on steel. Use these on soft metals only. And that goes for any of your wire strippers, unless it says otherwise. These are the first pair that I had. These were given to me by, basically, they were given to me by the guy that got me into electrical work in the first place. I was working construction before I did electrical, and these were given to me then. But these are just your basic stamped wire strippers, you know, small handles. But that's what I was rocking for the first while I was doing my apprenticeship. I then got these Huskies. And actually I had a set of the Klein needle nose and I burnt those up, and then I bought these Huskies. These are not bad, especially for the price. You know, these are nice, cheap, forged wire strippers. They don't cut the best. You know, they fold over each other. There's just a little bit of wobble in the head. And you can kind of see I've burned up the ends of these too. But I could recommend these still. You know, the spring is kind of worn out on them. I think the spring is actually supposed to be folded in a different way than it is currently. But yeah, I could still recommend these. Oh yeah, there we go. Well, maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, the spring is supposed to do something different. But yeah, I would still recommend these. I would also recommend the Klein forged wire strippers. They've got some newer ones that are pretty good pliers, very similar to the Knipex at half the price. But what I would recommend over all else is these Racketeers Crocs. You know, these are another pair of stamped wire strippers. They've got a nice wide handle on them, so I mean you can get a little bit more leverage. Your hands further out. You're not trying to work with these little bitty things. I've also had the Klein curved ones. They're okay. I've had the Milwaukee curved wire strippers. They're okay. I've had the Milwaukee needle nose. I don't care for those. So I would say either these or the Huskies starting out, or something similar. I mean, I haven't tried every brand, so I can't vouch for every brand. Yeah, these are a cheap tool. This is what I meant by disposable tool. These small Kleins, I'd say the same thing. It's disposable. You know, get these when you're starting out, use them for your first week until you get paychecks coming in, and then move on. So we'll move on to the next item, and that is going to be a set of Allen keys. Now this one is a negotiable for an apprentice. You don't need Allen keys all the time. Making up panels is kind of the main thing. And when, you know, I have a set of metric, and I would recommend getting a set of metric as well as SAE. The metric you'll use for things like light fixtures or appliances. A lot of them use metric. Your SAEs you'll use on some of the light fixtures if they're made in the USA, and you will use them on panels, making up the mains for the panels. These are just generic brands. Yeah, I don't recommend spending a lot of money on them. I actually had a set of keys like this, Hyper Tough keys that had the ball grip on them, or the ball end on them, and they were great. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend spending a whole bunch of money on Allen keys. So next thing is going to be a claw hammer. This is an S-wing claw hammer. You know, not too expensive. I actually found this on the side of the road. That's the only reason I have this hammer. But I could recommend Cobalt. That's the hammers that I've used until I had this one. And honestly, I prefer those, but I've just always lost my hammers. And when I found a hammer, I thought it was kind of God's way of saying, hey, you keep losing yours, here's a hammer. Next on my list, next on my list is going to be channel locks. And, you know, tongue and groove pliers, water pump pliers, whatever, we call them channel locks. So here I've got a two 12-inch sets of regular channel locks. This one has the hex grip up top. I've got a 10-inch set of Cobras, and I've got a 6-inch set, two 6-inch sets of channel locks. So I did not have the Cobras until this month. And, you know, I love these pliers. These are great, but these are expensive. However, they are not that much more expensive than channel locks. So if you are an apprentice, you know, if you have to, I would recommend actually, if you're looking for cheaper sets, I do have a set of 10-inch Milwaukee. And these are the regular tongue and groove. These, they're a little bit loose, but they have a much better bite than the regular channel locks. And these are just the red handle. They have what they call a conduit reamer on the back of them. Basically, they just don't have rubber on the back. If you're wanting to ream conduit, I always take my channel locks and take the head of them, ream the inside, and then open them up and then turn them backwards, ream the outside. But I usually use a conduit reamer for all that anyway. But yeah, if you're wanting to go cheap, if you're trying to save money, I recommend the Milwaukee. If you want something that's going to last forever and something that you are always going to use, these Cobras have the best bite. You know, they're really quick to use the button. So I do recommend these, but only if you have the money to spend starting out. If you have to, I would get, and I would only get the 10-inch pair when you start. I would not get the 12-inch. I would not get the 6-inch when you start. I would save those for later. You know, 10-inch will do most of what you need. 12-inch is just a little bit bigger. You can start getting into larger pipe, but you can use your journeymans usually whenever you're starting. And the 6-inch are just nice because they're light. You can carry them in your bag, and they're really nice for 1/2-inch, 3/4 conduit. All right, so I feel like this is one of the things that is an omen to how much I use my tools. This thing has been ran over, it's been dropped off of tall ladders, and you know, this thing is just incredible with the durability. This is a Klein 25-foot tape measure, and you can tell it's seen better days. You know, this thing is beat to crap. The rubber's coming off in places, but you know what? It still functions. It's still a tape measure. But as an apprentice, this is the only tape measure that I recommend for apprentices. So the thing that I really like about this tape measure specifically is on the back of it, and of course, again, this one is beat up. I've used this, I have had this tape measure since after my first week. My first tape measure was a Hart tape measure that I got at Walmart. That lasted me about a week in the field, and then I went out and bought a Klein tape measure with my first paycheck. But this is the part that is just super helpful for your first-time apprentices. You have all your conduit bending multipliers, shrink factors, all of that information just right here on the back of the tape measure. And that saves quite a bit of time as an apprentice, not having to sit there and try to look up every single conduit bending multiplier, every single shrink factor. I mean, it saves a bunch of time. So I recommend getting the Klein 25-foot tape measure. So we are getting to the end of the list. And at the end of this, I will show you every tool that I think is necessary. And I'll just do it once, you know, tell you everything that I think is necessary. And I will leave out all the stuff that I think that you could get away without. But one thing that you are going to need is a level. This is the Klein 6-inch level. Make sure you get the billet aluminum levels, and they've got the neodymium magnets in them, because when you're bending conduit, you want that magnet to stick. One thing that you do not want to get is something like this. This is a Hyper Tough. It's plastic. This one doesn't have a magnet on it. I have a Craftsman one that's the same thing. It's plastic, but it's got just a magnetic strip on the bottom. Do not buy those. You know, you might be tempted because they're super cheap, but it always ends up that the magnets don't stick very well if it's just got the magnetic strip, and the plastic is just not very durable. You will end up being out of level sooner or later just because, you know, this thing bends. Not great. You know, it'd be okay for a homeowner, but just get yourself a billet aluminum level. Klein, Milwaukee, Empire, Ideal, they're all pretty much the same quality, but get yourself a nice billet aluminum level. And then the last hand tool on this list is a drywall knife. You can't get by without being able to cut into drywall. Eventually I recommend getting a multi-tool with blades on it, and you can cut through drywall with it, but yeah, get yourself a drywall knife. This one's just a Stanley. There's folding ones from Klein that I really like. Folding Milwaukee. I do recommend folding knives if you can swing it, but these are they're cheap, they're good quality. But yeah, the fixed blade does cut into things over time, which is kind of unfortunate, but it happens. So the last thing, which should actually be the first thing, because what you're going to be doing on your first week is most likely digging ditches and or putting in receptacles. That's always the first job as an apprentice. But get yourself a good pair of leather gloves, something that doesn't have a seam like along your wrist right here. You know, make sure the seam is back, because you will get blisters if your seam is above the heel of your hand. But get yourself a good pair of gloves. Take care of your hands so they can take care of you. Those are your money makers. I do also recommend safety glasses, you know, Milwaukee or Klein or, you know, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just get yourself a good pair of safety glasses. You only have one pair of eyes. And as my journeyman used to say, you can't hear boobies. Just keep that in mind. I don't have a pair of safety glasses up here because I wear I wear prescription glasses, and I've got little safety clips on the side that I can put on. But if you wear glasses, I recommend getting little safety clips. If not, then get yourself a pair of safety glasses. So this one is another negotiable. You know, it's not something that you need, but it is something that's helpful. So if you can swing it, get yourself a good quality meter. This one is a Klein. It's got the amp clamp, and I'll leave a link for this one. But another good one is a Fluke 5000 series, or T5 600 series. So T5 or T6 are both really good meters from Fluke. They're very light. You can take them in the field. You know, they can take abuse. This one is rather new, so I can't speak too much to it, but I do. My boss actually has one of these as well, and he's ran it for years, never had any issues with it. It's never lied to him. So Klein is another good meter. Both of these are really good options. All right, so the last thing on my list is an impact driver, which if you are union, then I think they pay for your power tools and provide those for you. But if you are private, a lot of times you have to provide at least your basics. You know, your employer will get your really expensive stuff, but you know, your drill, impact driver, sawzall, bandsaw, normal power tools, you end up having to pay for yourself. So this, believe it or not, is the Milwaukee Surge. This is the Gen 1 M12 Milwaukee Surge. This thing has been through hell and back. I have beat and abused this thing. I mean, you can see back into that's, you know, the fuel part is gone. It may or may not have been used as a hammer a time or two. It's fallen off of ladders, fallen off of scaffolding. But this thing has taken a hell of a beating over the years, and it still holds up. It still works. I still use it every day. Functions as it should. No issues. The only problem that I have with it is the belt clip on here. This screw always works its way loose. So this belt clip's always loose, which is why it's so beat up, because it'll be, you know, hooked onto my belt and it'll just work its way loose, end up upside down or something, and fall off a ladder. So I need to figure something out for the belt clip. If you have any ideas, let me know in the comments, because, you know, last thing I want is for it to hit somebody in the head. So I know a lot of people like those 3-inch bits. What I like is using a magnetic bit holder with 1-inch bits. Mainly if I'm driving sheetrock screws or wood screws or anything like that. That's what I'll use. I've also got a 6-inch magnetic bit holder that I'll use. I do like those 3-inch bits for making up receptacles, making up panels, things like that. Basically things that I don't need the magnet for. And a lot of those things, it's just nicer having a thinner shaft here. But yeah, that's the Milwaukee impact driver. And along with that, I do recommend having a good bit set. This one is Weehaw. If I can open it. I do not care for this case, but the case isn't the reason I bought it. But yeah, the case is very bulky. I do like how the bits come out of this. They kind of lock into these little grooves here, and you can just bend them up and they'll sit just like that, and you can pull them out. So they come out easy, but they retain well. They don't just fall out of there. But these are the Weehaw Blue Point bits. These are a really good set. Milwaukee's got a really good set. Klein has a really good set. There's plenty of good sets out there. And I like this one because it has the longer nut setters. It does not have a 1/4 inch though, which is kind of disappointing. Because I mean, you can use the 1/4 inch, you know, just take that bit out and use this as a 1/4 inch, but then there's no magnetic retention. So that's kind of a bummer. This does have more 3.5 inch bits, but I have a bit set that I put together that I put all of those in. And then I've also got a number 1 square out of here that's in my 6-inch magnetic bit holder. So yeah, there's a couple things missing out of here, but for the most part, it's still a complete set. The stuff that's missing is just in other sets. So I do actually still have all of the bits from this. I just not all in this. But yeah, that's a good set. So I'll leave a link for that one. I'll also leave a link for the Milwaukee. Another thing that I don't have here, but I do have in the truck, is a set of impact rated drill bits. because you can use this as a drill. I actually do it all the time, and I have not really had a hard time with most of my bits. In fact, I have only broken my bits when I stick them in my actual drill. I've never broken a bit in this or bent a bit. So, you know, people will tell you don't drill with your impact driver, but I have better luck drilling with my impact driver than my drill lately. All right, so this is everything that I think that you absolutely have to have. Everything else on this list is, you know, these are things that are nice to have, but they're things that aren't necessary on your first day. So when you walk in the door on your first day, these are things that I would recommend having. Everything else, you know, you can wait till you get your first paycheck and start building your tools as you go, and not try to spend a whole bunch of money. So, and I am going to try to do this in order of what you'll need. So the first is your gloves and a set of safety glasses. You want to make sure that you have those. Next thing is pliers, and I will say the next thing on the list is a good set of linemen's. And then I actually forgot to grab them. I have my bag next to me. And then a good set of strippers. Those two. Needle nose are optional because you can use these strippers as your needle nose. You know, they got a thin head on top. But if you want, you can get a set of needle nose. And I'll actually leave a link to a Apprentice, I don't know if they call it an Apprentice toolkit or a Journeyman toolkit from Klein. I'll leave that link as well, because, you know, that's really nice starting out. Then diagonal cutters. Then pocket knife. Actually, I take that back. Pocket knife before screwdriver, or before pliers, and flashlight before pliers. Because you want to be able to see in dark spaces, and your pocket knife, I mean, open up boxes, strip wires. You can do everything with that. After that, I would say your pen, pencil, marker. And then I would say your tape measure. Then your non-contact voltage tester, because most likely on your first day or two, you're not going to be working with wires other than putting in receptacles, which, I don't know, you might want to move this up on the list. But yeah, again, your first day or two, you'll be digging ditches and putting in receptacles. That's what we all do. And then a dedicated set of screwdrivers, and these four I would consider essential. The number 1 square and the number 1 Phillips I would not consider as essential, nor the termination screwdriver. You can borrow them if you need them, and you don't need them very often. But these four, you know, you need them every day. This one for smaller breakers and, not device screws, plate screws. This one for some of the some of the smaller main lugs, as well as a beater screwdriver. And again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the Milwaukee, but that's the 1/4 inch I have on hand. A number 2 Phillips, that is for pretty much everything. And then a number 2 square, and you'll use that primarily for panel screws and breakers. Again, you probably won't be messing with a lot of breakers or anything on your first day, so your absolute essentials, I'd say, is these two. Number 2 Phillips and a 3/16 flathead. So if you can only get 2 screwdrivers, get those 2. And I'll leave a link for a set of Klein that has the 3/16 and the Phillips, and I'll also leave a link for a full set of screwdrivers. And then the last thing that I would consider necessary is a level. You know, you may not need it for pipe, but you will need something to make sure devices are level on your first few days. So that'll be the end of the video. So if you have any questions, you can leave them down in the comments. I try to read every comment that I get. I think at some point I will be doing a video of my personal loadout and what I keep on a day-to-day basis. So keep an eye out for that. Until the next one, I suppose. Thank you.